Hi, this is Curt Robbins with Higher Learning LV in Las Vegas, and welcome to season 2 of Curt's Cannabis Corner. Welcome back to my co-hosts, David Rheins from the Marijuana Business Association in beautiful Seattle, Washington.
Happy Tuesday, Curt. I am so excited. Season 2, and they thought it would never last.
That's right, we showed them. And my other co-host, Alana Armstrong from the Alana PR agency in beautiful Toronto, Canada.
Hello again, Curt and Dave. I'm so glad that you didn't replace me.
And this week's episode, we're talking about something very important to the emerging cannabis and hemp industries, and that is business ethics. And as we always do, we bring in really smart, experienced subject matter experts to discuss this. And this week, we bring in Mika Unterman from Toronto, Canada. She knows a whole lot about business ethics. Mika, give us some background on how you got your perspective on business ethics.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about this with you. And my background in business ethics really came from working in the industry and seeing it firsthand. And so I founded my not-for-profit Apical Ethical Cannabis Collective, which specifically focuses on implementation, what we call ESG.
You've taught me that ESG is a great way for a profit-making or nonprofit business to try to approach implementation of ethics.
ESG is often seen as a financial tool. It's how investors will look at a company and decide, what is the level of risk associated with this company in terms of environmental and social risks. And that's how it's really seen today, is just as an investing lens. But ultimately, it's also about how each of these companies reports on their own initiatives, their decision-making process. And then it's a way, once you have that benchmark and you have those reportings, it's a way for a company to sort of say, here are the actions that we're going to take to improve these benchmarks, to lower our carbon footprint or increase our social justice initiatives, things like that.
Mr. Rheins, what do you think about this ESG stuff?
Oh, I love it. I think this is a super interesting conversation that I'm going to suggest will take a couple of sessions. We have an opportunity in the cannabis industry to invent the industry whole cloth. Many of these startups, they are in a position to define what the industry looks like, and whether or not, I think those of us who came from more of the activist standpoint, intentionally tried to create an industry that reflected the diversity of its founding population and also was in the image of the cannabis consumer. It's a challenging environment because we were a grassroots industry, and yet we're evolving at such a speed that we're being subsumed in many ways. We've talked about this by big alcohol and big CPG and big tobacco and publicly traded international corporations who historically have looked at morality and ethics as part of their PR standpoint. I guess I'd love to drill down into Mika's notion in her article that it is in fact policy that will help, that will resonate with cannabis consumers, that will make the brand differentiated, that will ultimately allow these grassroots companies to survive the corporate onslaught.
David, I think what's unique about the cannabis industry right now is that our workforce and our consumer base is largely millennial and Gen Z, which is the differentiating factor when we think about bev alcohol and pharmaceuticals and consumer packaged goods, right, and all of these industries that are coming in and trying to take over cannabis. They are of the old school. Those of us who have been working in cannabis, perhaps even pre-legalization, we are younger, and we already acknowledge and understand that shared value is kind of the way of the future.
Alana, what do you think about all this?
Oh, I love ESG, and I thank Mika for actually introducing me further to the concepts and methods behind ESG reporting. I come from a media perspective. What companies do need to understand is that these initiatives or actions that are tied into ESG only serve to improve and color their own story in an authentic and true way. Making choices that are sustainable, that are environmentally minded, and spearheading initiatives, even if it does cost the company money, the return is in building that company's story.
One thing that I'm impressed by is that ESG kind of takes it to the next level. And Mika, tell me if this is true, if my perception that you bake it into your strategy. It's part of daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly decision making. It's not, as you say in the article, something that you just cap off at the end. Oh, look, we made a lot of profits. Let's give a little slice to those in need. This seems to be more of an integrated daily approach.
Exactly. I mean, environmental social governance and shared value creation is not about how profits are spent. It's about how profits are made. So when we talk about environmental social governance, when we talk about shared value creation, it's really about understanding that we as a business are part of a larger social system, which is part of a larger environmental system. And those systems have limits. Yes, it comes down to your everyday decisions. Often I hear, well, okay, our stakeholders are, our customers and our shareholders. Okay, well, what about the planet?
That really is the sea change, right? So you talked about it as being old school, but literally in business schools, they would caution that that was not your role. And in taking your eye off the profit and taking your eye off of the business, you were in fact imperiling the business. So the notion that that would be the starting point and that the earth is a shareholder, that's a controversial. I guess one of the things I'd love you to talk about a little bit, Mika, is we're in then what I'd call a transition point between these two worldviews. There's probably more than two as we bring in other non-capitalist systems, but let's just simplify it for this discussion. And I'm wondering, the challenge, of course, is that we still play in the not only the marketplace of ideas, but in the generally publicly traded marketplace. Despite our sartorial uniformity today, it's not quite as black and white as that.
In many ways, you can think about it as not being your problem, and certainly tackling all of the climate change issues that we see today, the GHG emissions, waste in terms of extraction, waste in terms of human-made materials. That's not all one business's problem.
Right.
But in order to take responsibility for the small portion that we play as a business, you have to look at the whole system and then come down and say, okay, well, where in my supply chain am I actually contributing to these problems? And what can I do to mitigate that?
Even the most onerous of military industrial corporations is going to play at least lip service to recycling and sustainability. The traditional perspective would be, well, I make money, we generate salaries, we pay taxes, those taxes and salaries go to government. There's a process then for how those taxes are spent, and that's how we contribute. That would be one. The other point of view would say, hey, this should all be mandated. Let's put more government regulations. Let's make sure you can't sell these things. And then there are those who say, well, I believe in all that, but let the marketplace will out, and big government in that regulation adds enough waste and dirtiness and inefficiencies that it's actually no better. You started off with, hey, there's a millennial, there's a generational shift, there's a new generation coming up, and us older dogs should be better stewards of the planet, better stewards of this industry, and let's make sure that we allow this industry to sustain. And I think that's fantastic, right? But then the question becomes, but how is that regulated, and who will decide what those regulations are? Is that the FDA going to tell me what's sustainable? Is that the DEA? Is it big industry that's going to regulate itself? Or is it big government? Is Joe Biden going to tell me how to run my business? And is that going to make it any more efficient?
I just want to know, where's my electric Corvette? Come on, where's my electric Corvette?
Who Killed the Electric Car? Great movie.
Well, that's a great one. The same people who killed hemp, the petrochemicals.
And I think, and what we have seen actually in action is that when there are regulations that are mandated by these bodies, for example, in California, we have all sorts of environmental regulations and different reporting structures, which makes it prohibitively expensive for cultivation facilities to actually get licensed. So at the end of the day, corporations need to be held accountable.
You mentioned accountability quite a few times. To whom and how? Accountability to me sounds like legal ramifications, additional laws. And from my perspective, I'm a bit of a libertarian. Regulations normally translate into taxation. Right? Regulations is just expensive, which makes it more difficult for those who may be well-intentioned to play.
I think the first level of accountability is to our company, because more and more we're seeing that employees, our teams, want to work at a place where they feel like they're working towards something that's good, that's bigger than themselves, and that the company that they work for is following through on the commitments that they make. That first level of accountability is to your own little insular community of people who work for this company. And so then there's that additional level of accountability that comes through when we talk about our consumer. Who is buying our product, and are they voting with their dollars? An additional level of accountability that comes through on the investor side. We talked about ESG as an investing tool. How as a business can they both make a product, help the environment, and serve their community all at the same time?
Alana, you have a lot of clients in Canada. How are they embracing ethics, or are they?
These topics are really hush hush, and a lot of them don't quite know how to engage, or perhaps they feel that they're too new, or maybe they, it's not in their budget to be
too fragile, not new, fragile, right?
Too fragile.
From my standpoint, we're talking about a future state. This is not the state we're in, but it's about education and not regulation. You don't mandate morality. You can't punish me to be better, right? You can't sanction me if I'm not progressive enough. Quite honestly, we live in a world where 50% of the people are going to deny even the most basic science around global warming. So I think the government regulation thing ultimately doesn't play well for the industry or the end consumer. And ultimately, it's about educating the consumer. Now, you're suggesting that generationally, they're already hipper and more woke and more aware and more conscientious and making those decisions. I applaud that. I happen to be in a part of the country where I don't necessarily see that every day here on my vacation.
Ultimately, I think as it relates to price, a lot of the things that we pay for right now are too cheap, because they don't include the cost of externalities. The way things are priced right now doesn't actually take into account what it costs, not just the consumer, but society and the planet as a whole.
I think, quite honestly, the approach is intentionality, just like the electric vehicles or the wind turbines that we talked about. The reality is that they're inefficient today, but it signals a societal commitment to moving away from petrochemicals. And the end consumer will not pay 50 cents more for that tube. And at the end of the day, they don't care.
Go back to the educational element, right? Educate the consumer on the systemic
That's
kind of
right.
an ESG view for consumers, right? What's the system incur?
Yeah, and I think it's unfair, quite honestly, that these decisions have to be made at the appropriate level. I think it's unfair to say to an immigrant trying to make his way that, hey, you can't use this gas wall. Hey, you can't pitch this tent. Hey, you can't drink this Coca-Cola because it's ruining the planet. If what they're doing is subsistence, if what they're doing is trying to make a living, if what they're doing is trying to get to that next level. It's only those wealthy countries, those wealthy societies, the segments of those societies that has the ability to be progressive, has the ability to invest in a future state, knowing that the cost is short-term loss of profit, right? So they make this investment so that the long-term goal. And that's why I'm suggesting that the cannabis industry has that opportunity. We're the fastest growing industry. We've got 20, 30 years of pent-up demand. There's enough money out there that we actually can create it. And I think the real question is, are we looking for Big Brother to tell us how to regulate this? Are we looking for industry to come up with one standard? And then, as you talked about, sanctions or accountability, to me always means that what are the consequences, right? You're only accountable if there's consequences to you not adhering. And then lastly, the end consumer drives everything. Talk to one of the lead buyers at Walmart, and we were talking about organics. saying, hey, why don't you sell more organic fish? Why don't you sell more organic meat? Why don't you sell more planet-friendly products, plant-based lifestyle stuff? And the buyer said to me, hey, Rheins, I don't care what we sell. We don't care what we sell. We sell what people buy. And if people came in here and said they wanted organic vegetables, that's what we'd sell.
Alana Armstrong, salmon, lobsters, hemp doob tubes. What do you make of these business ethics?
I'm horrified. Wow, what a story. I think there are several ways that I can think of in Canada alone where, as Mika said, these regulatory levers can go both ways. And, just turning off a couple of things that basically force our companies here to waste product, to choose packaging and plastics that are overbearing of the product within and oftentimes not recyclable. Those are things that perhaps
that are mandated. They're not choices. You have to package in childproof. You have to have an external. And in the early days here in the States, places like Colorado, you had to put everything into a big Mylar zip bag at the end of it. And so there was a lot of cost, and those Mylar bags are definitely not eco-friendly.
Mika, tell us how people can get a hold of you.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here and giving me this opportunity to talk about what I think is kind of the new era of doing business. And it's certainly challenging. It's unclear. There's going to be mistakes made, and then we're going to correct them. And that's why I myself founded Apical, the Ethical Cannabis Collective. We launch a cohort this September to discuss exactly these issues, where we're actually going to be working on prioritizing specific goals and then working towards implementation, and that there are going to be some challenges and trade-offs that we have to make. But that's part of the discussion in terms of shared value creation, which is what I am working towards in the cannabis industry, is creating and crafting companies that are working towards business value, societal value, and environmental value. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go to theapical.website. Apical is APICAL, or you can get in touch with me via email, unt.mika@gmail.com. I'd love to talk to you about this. And so thanks again for giving me the opportunity to do that.
Thanks, Mika. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us and our viewers. Alana, what do you think about all this?
I love learning more about ESG and how companies can do more, how they can be in the startup phase and still be building ESG into their strategies. And also, I want to see more case studies of how implementing such things helps a company in the long run, especially in the cannabis industry. It would be great to be able to show new companies or more established ones. Hard to say established, but more established ones. You can always find me at Alan Aldis, but I'm actually going to plug Mika just one more time in this. She's writing some really wonderful articles that she's posting on Medium right now. And if you type in the hashtag big ESG energy into either LinkedIn or Twitter, posting about ESG in the cannabis industry, and giving her commentary, her very, very smart commentary. So thank you, Mika. Thank you, Curt. And thank you, David.
I've learned a lot from Mika's articles. I think other entrepreneurs will also, and I highly recommend them. Mr. Rheins, what's your wrap up on this whole business ethics thing?
Perspective, I come from the business perspective, and I think first generation cannabis, we fought for the right to do business. And I think this discussion is all about now fighting for the intentionality to do right. I think it's more difficult when the rubber hits the road. I think all ethics are situational. I think that it depends on your environment. It depends on the state of the industry. And I think that having the intention to be more socially equitable, to be kinder to the planet, to have a flatter hierarchy within your operations. Those things are great principles to build your business. But at the end of the day, I guess I'm old school, and I do believe that the first motivation of a business is to stay in business, just like the first motivation of a government is to stay in government. If you're not in business or you're not in government, you can't do all the wonderful things you'd like to do. We're super nascent as a cannabis industry. And so I do believe that our intentions are the right thing. I eschew overregulation, which I see as taxation, and I'm going to suggest more cooperation. So I think we should be careful before instituting too many policies and regulations. We're a young industry, and the majority of Americans and North Americans have not even participated in our industry yet. I would like to make sure that those small entrepreneurs have an opportunity to thrive before we overburden them with regulations.
Thanks again to this week's guest, Mika Unterman. We'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Curt.
Thank you.
Got it.